Shalom Aleichem, welcome back. I hope you all had a very wonderful, refreshing summer. Welcome to a new series of Halacha Shiurim. As ever, we find a very interesting topic which somehow relates to the coming week's Sedra. And this week's Sedra, Parshas Kiseitze, has a huge amount of mitzvahs, 74 mitzvahs, and one of them is Lo Yilbash. So the topic we've chosen is, can men dye their hair? The Pasuk says, Lo Yech Ligev al Isha, that a woman mustn't wear men's clothing, men's items. Nor should a man wear women's clothing. It's considered a ta'eva, it's considered an abomination in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rashi explains, and if you're listening online and you want the handout, please do email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. Rashi says, Lo yech ligev al isha, what is the reason for this prohibition? It says Rashi, shetehei doime leish kadei shetelech bein ha'anoshim, that a woman can't dress up as a man and look like a man, that it will be easier for her to intermingle with men, she'ein ze el l'shem niyuf, because this is really for lewd purposes. And similarly, conversely, v'lo yilbash gever simlas isha, a man mustn't wear women's clothing, leishev v'leishev bein hanoshim, because again it will be easier for him to intermingle with women, and he does so for lewd intention. The chinuch in mitzvah Tov Kuf Mem Beis says the following: Misharsha mitzvah laharchik me'imoseinu hakadesha, to distance our holy nation, davo erva, something which is licentious, which is lewd, v'chol inyan v'chol tzad yeh hakishlein b'eisadav v'motzu mitoichai, and it could people could stumble as a result of it. Ve'en sofek ki im yiyu malbushei hanoshim v'noshim shavim, if men and women had the same clothing, yisarvu elu elu tomidu melei haaretz zima, it would be easier for men and women to intermingle, and that would be a sort of a slippery slope in terms of lewdness, licentiousness, etc. That's the reason essentially Rashi brings. And then the Chinuch gives the second reason, shehi laharchik kol inyan avodah zarah, to distance ourselves from avodah zarah, shedarkan shelovdei avodah zarah, hoyebekach, this was the way of people who would perform avodah zarah, i.e. they would wear these sort of feminine robes. Ve'ela shnei hatamim motzasi b'sifrei Rambam achar chosafti b'osom. So says the Chinuch, so I was gratified and I found these two reasons in the Rambam after I had already written them, so I was very pleased to see that. So those are the reasons given by Rashi in the Chinuch. And interestingly, the Gemara in Nazir, Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph, says that this extends beyond clothes. The Gemara says, Lo yibash gever simlas isha, shelo yisakein ish b'tikunei isha, i.e. that a man mustn't wear the embellishments of a woman, i.e. Makeup, jewellery, and generally sort of feminine practice, removal of body hair, that would be included in this prohibition. Now there is an important machlokes between the Rambam and the Rabbi and others as to the status of the prohibition. The Rambam says in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Perek Yud Beis Halacha Yud, v'cheinim tzova sa'ara shachar misheyitzba se'ah levana achas loike. The Rambam says you get malchus if you start dyeing hair, which is of course malchus is a deraisa. Says the Ravad, Oma Avraham lo mechava she'loike ba'achas shelo. Why are you getting malchus if you just pull out one hair? Or you pull out one, or you dye one hair. Shelo omru ela osa, because the Gemara says it's osa. V'oid my ede isha ika b'chada v'ole minker milsaklal. And moreover, it's not clear that if you pull out one hair, where it's hardly noticeable, so it's hardly going to cause intermingling and things like that, and therefore the Ravad is of the opinion that this is all d'Rabbanan. Now, importantly, the Gemara in Makkas has an important source for this. The Gemara says in Makkas Tav Chof Amud Aleph, "Melaked levonos mitoich shecheres afilu achas chayev," that if a man picks out levonos mitoich shecheres, a white hair from his black hair, even one chayev. And that is not a prohibition which is only on Shabbos, because of course that is a prohibition to pull out hair on Shabbos, but even that during the week would be also. Because it's a feminine practice. The Shulchan Aruch codifies this in Siman Kuf Pei Beis Sivav. The Gemara says, the Shulchan Aruch says, also it's prohibited for a man, the laket afilu se'ah echod, lavon mitoich hashcheres, that a man can't pull out a grey hair, a white hair, from his black hair, mishum le'ilbash geva, because it violates this prohibition. And furthermore, says the Shulchan Aruch, that it's prohibited for a man to dye his hair, the white hair which is amid his black hair, to dye that black. Afilu sa'ar achas, even one hair. Interestingly, going the other way, dyeing his hair all grey, all white, is much less of a problem. The problem here is dafka, the way the Gemara says it, of levana shir shecheres, making the white hair dark. Okay, so either way, the Shulchan Aruch in Kuf Pei Beis in Yerodea says that it's prohibited for a man to dye his hair. Now the question is, are there any heterim? And the question comes up in different guises, that often a person feels somewhat embarrassed if he prematurely turns grey, and it comes up in different ways, either because just generally he's embarrassed socially, or in terms of shidduchim, it makes him look older than he is, and are there any heterim? So the first source is the Marsham. If you look at paragraph 6, the Marsham, Chelik Beis Siman Reish Mem Gimel, says this, Miksova higiani v'advash elosu b'ish echot k'ben shloishim. There was a young man, he's 30 years old, shenisla ben chatzi ziknei. Half of his beard has become white. He's a successful businessman who goes off to far distant countries. It looks strange. Half his beard is white, half is black. It looks unusual. Is he allowed to essentially dye his hair that it's all one color? Does it violate the prohibition that is brought, as we just saw in Yerodea Siman Kuf Pei Beis? He's not doing it for any of the concerns that Rashi and the Chinuch mentioned. He's doing it because he's embarrassed. So he says, the Marsham says, this is an old question, and this question was posed to the Divrei Chaim, the great Reb Chaim of Sons. Chelik Beis Yerodea Siman Samach Beis v'remez ledvash harashba shlehitim mishum refuah lebedrabanan. And he mentions that the Rashba says in Shuvas that that's the only thing that this can violate is Surah Drabanan. Kagoin giluach seh bebeis hashechim mipnei sheyesh be chatotin avol benidin didan sheyesh be issa Torah. Here we're dealing with potentially an issa Torah, certainly according to the Rambam. Ein lahatzi v'gam ha'tosis in Shabbos shekosu lahatzi lahasig galdi makas, sort of various covered over wounds. That is only allowed in a situation of drabonon. So the Marsham takes a stringent view, and the Shevet Halevi Reb Vosna follows this stringent view. What was his case? If you look at the next box in paragraph 6, a young man comes in front of us, he's of marriageable age, and he shows me, says Dayan Weiss. Sorry, this is Dayan Vosna, the Shevet Halevi. The lower half of his beard, nislabein kva b'tzad yamin. Sort of the bottom right-hand side of his beard is turning white. Because it might harm his shidduch prospects. He wants to, is there an eitzah without violating the Shulchan Aruch in Yerodea that we brought before? To also laket sa'aris, etc. Or it's spayel to dye his hair. So the Shevet Halevi quotes many achronim, the Maramshik, the Shalom Meshiv, the Divrei Chaim, Ve'inyan echad shenislabein chatzi zikna, etc. Elaz lahate v'noktu kulam lahachme. And he quotes all of these achronim who are stringent in this matter. And Omnom, he says, I'll give you an eitzah. The eitzah is, and essentially he tells him to trim the whole bottom of his beard so that the whole bottom layer comes off. That would be okay. And you're removing the white with the black across the whole sort of width of the beard, and that would be permissible. So you see that the Shevet Halevi doesn't allow you to dye his hair. He follows the stringent ruling of the Shalom Meshiv and the Maramshik and the Divrei Chaim and the Marsham, etc. However, there are lenient rulings, and that is one example of that is the Minchas Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So if you take a look at the penultimate box, Reb Shlomo Zalman says in Chelik Beis and Siman Pei Beis, he's talking about plastic surgery. which is a topic for another time. In fact, there is a shir on Torah Anytime that I've got on this topic. But in terms of how it applies to here, let's take a look. Nituach plasti. Someone had a plastic surgeon operated on him. That he's doing it not because of sort of cosmetic reasons, he's doing it because of a medical reason, or it could even be an emotional reason. For example, his nose, it looks very unusual, very different. It's different Michelle Kala Adam from other people. And therefore, being embarrassed, where it hampers social interaction and it's causing sort of emotional, mental distress on the person, then that could be grounds to allow plastic surgery. And for the same reason, and this is referencing our topic at hand, for the same reason we would be allowed to pull out white hairs from amongst black hairs, the Mishu Tzair, that a person is young and is going prematurely grey. So for his age, this is like a mum. His intention is not to mingle with women. His intention is just to just look like everybody else of his age. It's not a feminine practice. So if it's to sort of avoid embarrassment of some sort, then there would be grounds to be lenient. And so too the Srudeish says a very similar thing. If you look at the last box, I'll give you another reason to be matter, it says the Srudeish, because actually men do this nowadays. Men across the board seem to be dyeing their hair. And therefore he quotes the Drisha in Kuf Pei Beis, because it's the whole problem is that you can't do feminine practices. But if society changes and this becomes a practice which is, even though non-Jewish people are now doing this, then yesh lahatir, and then he adds, if Jewish people start doing this, then they can also re-establish what contemporary practice is. So it's actually a very interesting sort of quirk that it now becomes mutter for me to do it, even though the precedent was established by those who shouldn't have done it. But that's just an interesting irony. But he does say a machmet of bracha, but the consensus of contemporary authorities is that a man is permitted to dye his hair for any situation that is especially pressing, as we've said. So just to summarize, can men dye their hair? Why are we talking about it this week? Pashas Kiseitze, because amongst the 74 mitzvahs in this week's Edra, one of them is lo yilbash geves simlas isha, that a man can't wear women's clothing or vice versa. Rashi gives the reason because it might make it easier to intermingle with women, and the Chinuch brings that reason. Another reason of the sort of dressing up for Avodah Zarah, which is what the Rambam brings, both of those reasons. We said that it extends it, the Gemara in Nazir, to beyond clothes, to include embellishments, jewelry, makeup, and feminine cosmetic practices. Machleikas Rambam Ravid if it's Deraisa Drabanan, and the Gemara says that including in dyeing hair is included in sort of pulling out white hairs from a black body of hair, of a black head of hair, and even one hair would be also because of lo yilbash. And there are differences amongst the poskim whether it's mutter or not. The Shevet HaLevi follows the more stringent ruling of certain achronim, but Rav Shlomo Zalman, the Srudeish, the consensus of most contemporary poskim is that a man is permitted to dye his hair for any reason which is sort of causes him embarrassment or is especially pressing.